You remember their faces, even if you've forgotten their names. They were the mothers, the sweethearts, the femme fatales who filled the movie palaces of a Hollywood that no longer exists. Millions once knew those faces better than they knew their own neighbors. But behind the glamour, the studio system operated like a courtroom with no jury and no appeal. One accusation, one rumor, one signature on the wrong petition, and a woman who had spent 20 years building a career could vanish from the screen almost overnight. This isn't a story about bad reviews or fading beauty. It's about what happened when Hollywood decided that a woman's name had become too dangerous to say out loud. And the strangest part? The accusation itself often mattered less than the punishment. A marriage to the wrong man, a donation made in good faith, a petition signed years earlier. Any one of them could be enough. To understand how completely a leading lady could be erased, we begin with the case that set the tone for everything that followed. Number 16. Judy Holiday. Judy Holiday had just done something nobody in the industry saw coming. She beat Bette Davis and Gloria Swanson for the Academy Award for Best Actress in Born Yesterday, one of the brightest comic talents Hollywood had ever produced, at the exact moment that talent stopped being enough to protect anyone. She wasn't a political firebrand. She wasn't marching in the streets. But her name had appeared years earlier on the letterhead of a handful of liberal causes, and in the paranoid arithmetic of the Red Scare, a signature was as good as a confession. When investigators came calling, Holiday did not refuse to cooperate outright, but she also refused to hand anyone else over to save herself. She gave carefully vague, almost comically evasive answers, leaning into the same scatterbrained persona that had made her famous on screen, and it worked just well enough to keep her name off the industry's most severe blacklists. But the price was steep. The anxiety of those years followed her for the rest of her life, and directors quietly grew nervous about hiring an actress who had once needed defending. Holiday survived, but she survived diminished, a reminder that even winning an Oscar could not fully insulate a woman from suspicion. Her case established an uncomfortable truth for everyone who came after her. In this industry, talent was never the only qualification for employment. Loyalty, real or performed, mattered just as much. And the moment your name was whispered in the wrong room, no trophy on your mantle could buy back your safety. Number 15. Jean Muir. On a summer afternoon in 1950, an actress named Jean Muir was preparing for the debut of a new television show called The Aldrich Family. She had been cast as the mother, a warm, reassuring presence meant to welcome American households into their living rooms every week. She never got the chance. Days before the premiere, a slim pamphlet called Red Channels listed her name among suspected sympathizers, and the sponsor did not wait to ask questions. General Foods, the company paying for the airtime, pulled her from the role before a single episode aired. There was no trial, no hearing, no opportunity to respond to the accusation in public. There was only a phone call, and then silence. What makes Muir's case so chilling is the speed of it. Soupy Sales needed 60 seconds of an ad-libbed joke to trigger a suspension. Jean Muir needed nothing at all except a name on a list compiled by people she had never met. She became the first performer fired specifically because of television's new and terrified relationship with sponsorship. Networks were still learning that this fragile new medium lived or died by advertiser comfort, and Muir's career became the object lesson. She spent years afterward trying to clear her name through lawyers and public statements, but the entertainment industry had already made its decision, and it never fully reversed it. Her sudden disappearance from a role she hadn't even performed yet proved that in this business, you didn't need to do anything wrong. You only needed to be perceived as a risk, and the machine would remove you before the cameras even rolled. Decades later, Muir would say the hardest part was never the loss of the job itself. It was the silence afterward, the fact that nobody in the industry ever felt obligated to explain themselves to the woman they had discarded. Number 14. Kim Hunter. By 1951, Kim Hunter had delivered one of the defining performances of American cinema, playing Stella in A Streetcar Named Desire, opposite Marlon Brando, a role that would eventually earn her the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. She was, by every conventional measure, at the peak of her craft. But years earlier, in a completely different climate, She had signed her name to a petition supporting the losing side of the Spanish Civil War, an act of conscience that seemed unremarkable at the time. In the new political climate of the 1950s, that old signature resurfaced like a debt collector she never knew she owed. Hunter found herself gray-listed rather than formally blacklisted, which in some ways was crueler. There was no official document barring her from work, only a slow, unspoken freeze. Directors who wanted to hire her would quietly be advised against it. Producers who admired her talent found themselves unable to explain, even to her, exactly why the offers dried up. She kept working sporadically, kept fighting to clear the fog around her name. But the momentum of her career, the kind of momentum that turns a great performance into a great decade, was gone. It would take her years of patient, dignified persistence to rebuild what had been quietly dismantled. Her case revealed a particularly insidious version of the machine at work. You didn't need a formal accusation to be punished. You only needed enough doubt in enough rooms, and the industry would do the rest of the work quietly, without ever putting its reasoning in writing. Number 13. Marsha Hunt. MGM's casting office once treated Marsha Hunt as one of the safest bets on the lot, a fixture with dozens of credits and a reputation as a hard-working professional throughout the late 1940s. She was also one of the founding members of the Committee for the First Amendment, a group of prominent industry figures, including Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, who flew to Washington to publicly object to the House Un-American Activities Committee's treatment of screenwriters and directors. It was meant to be a defense of principle. To the studios, it read as a declaration of allegiance to the wrong side. When Red Channels published its list in 1950, Marsha Hunt's name was on it, and the phone that had once rung constantly with job offers simply stopped ringing. There was no dramatic firing, no public confrontation. The work quietly evaporated, project after project, year after year, until a woman who had once been penciled into a dozen productions a season found herself explaining to reporters why she hadn't made a film in ages. She never recanted her position, and never named a single colleague to save herself. Instead, she redirected her considerable energy into humanitarian work, eventually becoming a tireless advocate for the United Nations and for the causes she had always believed in. Hunt lived to see herself honored decades later as a symbol of quiet, unbroken integrity. But the industry that discarded her never fully gave back what it took. This system did not punish disloyalty, it turned out. It punished visibility. And standing up in public was, in the eyes of the machine, the most visible thing a person could do. Number 12. Betsy Blair. Betsy Blair's interest in left-wing politics as a young actress in the late 1940s was enough to draw the full attention of the House Un-American Activities Committee, and by the early 1950s, her name carried the kind of weight that made producers nervous just to say it aloud. She had married Gene Kelly, one of the most beloved and bankable stars in the industry, and for a while that marriage offered her a strange kind of protective cover. It very nearly wasn't enough. When Blair was up for the role of Clara in the film Mady, the studio hesitated, worried that casting her would invite the same scrutiny that had cost other productions their financing. Gene Kelly, at the height of his own fame, made it known that he would not attend the upcoming Academy Awards and would make his objections to her exclusion very public if his wife wasn't given a fair chance at the part. It worked. Blair got the role, delivered a performance that earned her an Academy Award nomination, and for one shining moment, it appeared that loyalty from a powerful husband could beat back the machine. But the reprieve was narrow and temporary. Her film career in America never fully recovered its momentum, and she eventually rebuilt her professional life largely in Europe, where the political temperature was cooler and the work was steadier. Her story stands out precisely because it almost went the other way. It shows that even with a famous husband willing to spend his own reputation on her behalf, the best an actress in her position could hope for was a narrow exception, not a pardon. The system bent just once, and only because someone with enormous leverage was willing to risk it. Most actresses in her position had no such champion waiting in the wings, and Blair herself understood exactly how fragile that protection really was, later admitting she never fully trusted that the machine wouldn't simply change its mind. Number 11. Karen Morley. Karen Morley had been a striking presence in pre-code Hollywood, starring opposite Paul Muni in Scarface and building a career on sharp, independent-minded characters. Off-screen, she carried those same convictions into real activism, organizing with the Screen Actors Guild and eventually aligning herself openly with left-wing labor politics. In 1947, she was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee and refused to answer questions about her political affiliations, a choice that ended her film career almost overnight. Most blacklisted performers tried, at least publicly, to distance themselves from the label that had been placed on them. Karen Morley did the opposite. She leaned directly into it, eventually running for Lieutenant Governor of New York on the American Labor Party ticket, a decision that made any hope of quiet reinstatement essentially impossible. The industry did not merely freeze her out. It treated her as a cautionary tale to be pointed at whenever a young performer needed reminding of what defiance could cost. Morley never again worked at the level she had before 1947. She moved to New York, found occasional stage work, and spent the rest of her long life as an unapologetic activist, refusing to soften her story for anyone's comfort. What Morley's long exile demonstrates is something the machine rarely advertises about itself. It could tolerate an actress with unpopular opinions far more easily than it could tolerate one who refused to perform contrition. Silence might have been forgiven eventually. Defiance never was. Even her fellow blacklisted performers, many of whom eventually found quiet ways back into the industry's good graces, watched Morley's continued activism with a mixture of admiration and quiet dread, aware that her example was precisely the kind the studios wanted to make sure nobody else followed. Number 10. Lee Grant. Lee Grant was 24 years old and had just been nominated for an Academy Award for her very first film role when the House Un-American Activities Committee came looking for her husband, the screenwriter Arnold Manoff. Called before the committee herself, Grant was asked to provide testimony that would help build a case against him. She refused. It was an act of loyalty to her marriage that the industry immediately reclassified as an act of disloyalty to the country, and the consequences were swift and total. Grant did not work in film for 12 years. 12 years is not a setback. It is the entire span in which a young, promising actress typically becomes an established star, and Lee Grant spent that entire window locked out of the profession she had trained her whole life to enter. She kept her skills sharp through stage work and later television, refusing to disappear entirely even when the major studios refused to return her calls. When the Blacklist finally lost its grip on the industry in the late 1960s, Grant did something remarkable. She came back not as a curiosity or a relic, but as a genuine force, eventually winning the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for Shampoo, and years later, an Oscar for directing a documentary feature. Her story is often told as one of triumphant return, and it is. But it is worth remembering what that triumph cost first. 12 years of a young woman's prime, taken because she declined to trade her husband's freedom for her own convenience. Number 9. Anne Revere. An Oscar already sat on Anne Revere's mantle by 1946, one for National Velvet, and she had built an entire screen identity around playing exactly the kind of mother American audiences trusted instinctively: warm, wise, and unshakably decent. In 1951, the same year she completed a memorable role in A Place in the Sun, she was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee and invoked her Fifth Amendment right rather than answer questions about her political associations. The industry's response was immediate. Her scenes in the film she had just finished were quietly trimmed down to little more than a cameo, and the offers that had once arrived constantly simply stopped. For nearly 20 years, Anne Revere did not appear in another motion picture. A woman who had spent a decade perfecting the most trusted maternal figure on the American screen found herself unable to buy that trust back at any price. She returned to New York, ran an acting school with her husband to pay the bills, and eventually clawed her way back to the stage, winning a Tony Award in 1960 for her performance in Toys in the Attic. It was proof that her talent had never left her, only her access. When Hollywood finally allowed her back in the 1970s, she was given small, minor roles, a quiet acknowledgement of a debt the industry never fully repaid. Revere always maintained that the so-called evidence used against her was fabricated, and to her final years, She remained a free-thinking Yankee who refused to be told who to be loyal to. The industry took 2 decades from her anyway. Number 8. Gail Sondergaard. Gail Sondergaard holds a distinction that should have made her untouchable. She was the very first woman ever to win the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, taking home the trophy in 1937 for her performance in Anthony Adverse, before going on to build a long, celebrated career playing some of the screen's most memorable villainesses. Her real vulnerability had nothing to do with her own politics. It had everything to do with her marriage. Her husband, the director Herbert Biberman, was one of the Hollywood 10, the group of writers and directors who were jailed for refusing to cooperate with the House Un-American Activities Committee. Guilt by association was one of the Blacklist era's most effective weapons, and it fell on Sondergaard with devastating force. After 1949, her screen career came to an almost complete stop, not for anything she had said or done, but for the simple fact of who she had chosen to love and stand beside. She did not disappear quietly. She stood by her husband through his imprisonment, moved with him to New York, kept working in theater whenever she could find the opportunity, and refused to distance herself from him, even when doing so might have salvaged her own career. It took 20 years for Hollywood to offer her meaningful film work again. When it finally did, in the late 1960s and 1970s, she accepted it gracefully, without bitterness, though the 2 decades that had been taken from her could never be returned. In this industry, the machine did not always need you to be guilty. Sometimes it only needed you to be married to someone it had already decided to destroy. Number 7. Rosaura Revueltas. In February of 1953, on a dusty film set in Silver City, New Mexico, federal immigration agents arrived to arrest the star of an independent film about a miners' strike. Her name was Rosaura Revueltas, a respected Mexican actress who had crossed the border to play the lead role in a small production called Salt of the Earth, a film financed by a union that had been expelled from the mainstream labor movement for refusing to sign anti-communist pledges. The official charge against her was a technical passport violation, an error the government itself later admitted was its own mistake. It did not matter. She was held for 9 days under armed guard, repeatedly interrogated about her political beliefs, and then deported before the film had even finished shooting. The production crew was forced to complete her remaining scenes using a stand-in filmed from behind, piecing together a performance out of the fragments that remained after its lead actress had been physically removed from the country. Revueltas was permanently barred from working in American films again, and the fallout followed her home. Facing pressure from anti-communist elements in her own country, she found herself unofficially blacklisted in Mexico as well, locked out of the industry on both sides of the border for the crime of appearing in a film that dared to depict striking workers demanding equal treatment. She never made another American picture. Few other cases from this era show the machine reaching quite this far. It did not simply end a career here. It used the full force of a government to physically remove a woman from the set where she was still working, a level of intervention most studio executives never needed, and few could have imagined necessary. Number 6. Dorothy Comingore. Dorothy Comingore's place in film history was already secure by 1941. She played Susan Alexander Kane, the second wife of the title character in Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, a performance so effective that audiences and critics alike struggled afterward to separate the actress from the tragic, hollowed-out figure she had played on screen. It turned out to be an eerie kind of foreshadowing. A decade later, called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, Comingore refused to name names, and her career ended almost as abruptly as it had begun. Unlike some of her peers, she had no theater career waiting in the wings to catch her, no husband with enough leverage to shield her, no path back to relevance once the film offers disappeared. What followed was not simply professional obscurity, but a genuinely painful personal collapse. Her marriage fell apart under the pressure. She struggled increasingly with alcohol as the years of unemployment stretched on, and the woman who had once commanded the screen alongside Orson Welles at his creative peak spent her final years largely forgotten by the industry that had once celebrated her. She died at 58, a fraction of the long, comfortable career that her early talent had once promised her. Her story lacks the triumphant third act that some of her fellow blacklisted actresses eventually earned. There was no late career comeback, no retrospective honor, no vindication in her own lifetime. Dorothy Comingore's case is the Blacklist stripped of any softening narrative, a plain and uncomfortable demonstration of what happened to the performers who had no safety net waiting to catch them when the machine let go. It is easy, decades later, to admire the defiance of the performers who refused to cooperate and went on to build second careers. It is harder, and more honest, to sit with the ones for whom that same defiance simply meant the end. Number 5. Uta Hagen. Uta Hagen was, by nearly every account from the actors who studied under her, one of the finest acting teachers her generation ever produced. And before that reputation took hold, she was building a formidable career of her own on Broadway and in film. Her name appeared in red channels alongside dozens of her peers, and the effect on her film career was immediate and lasting. Hollywood, an industry built on nervous sponsors and nervous studio executives, simply stopped calling. Unlike performers whose entire identity was tied to the screen, Hagen had one advantage that many of her blacklisted colleagues did not. She had deep roots in New York theater, and it was there that she chose to build her second act, teaching a generation of young actors the discipline and honesty that Hollywood had, for a time, refused to let her practice on camera. Her students would go on to include some of the most respected names in American acting, a legacy that arguably outlasted anything a handful of additional film roles might have given her. Still, the choice was never entirely hers to make. Hagen did not walk away from Hollywood by preference. She was pushed out of it, and the theater became not simply a passion, but a necessity, the only stage still willing to have her. It's worth remembering that even the performers who eventually built rich, respected careers after the Blacklist did so in spite of the industry that discarded them, not because of any generosity it ever extended toward them. Number 5. Uta Hagen. Uta Hagen was, by nearly every account from the actors who studied under her, one of the finest acting teachers her generation ever produced. And before that reputation took hold, she was building a formidable career of her own on Broadway and in film. Her name appeared in red channels alongside dozens of her peers, and the effect on her film career was immediate and lasting. Hollywood, an industry built on nervous sponsors and nervous studio executives, simply stopped calling. Unlike performers whose entire identity was tied to the screen, Hagen had one advantage that many of her blacklisted colleagues did not. She had deep roots in New York theater, and it was there that she chose to build her second act, teaching a generation of young actors the discipline and honesty that Hollywood had, for a time, refused to let her practice on camera. Her students would go on to include some of the most respected names in American acting, a legacy that arguably outlasted anything a handful of additional film roles might have given her. Still, the choice was never entirely hers to make. Hagen did not walk away from Hollywood by preference. She was pushed out of it, and the theater became not simply a passion, but a necessity, the only stage still willing to have her. It's worth remembering that even the performers who eventually built rich, respected careers after the Blacklist did so in spite of the industry that discarded them, not because of any generosity it ever extended toward them. Number 2. Jean Seberg. By the late 1960s, Jean Seberg had already become an international icon of independent cinema, her cropped hair and unmistakable presence in Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless helping to define an entire era of filmmaking. Her real trouble began not with a studio executive or a congressional committee, but with the Federal Bureau of Investigation itself. Seberg had quietly donated money to civil rights causes, including the Black Panther Party, and under Director J. Edgar Hoover's counterintelligence program, that generosity was enough to make her a designated target for what the Bureau internally called neutralization. Agents wiretapped her phone, followed her between countries, and eventually orchestrated one of the cruelest smear campaigns the entertainment industry has ever seen, planting a false rumor with a Los Angeles gossip columnist that the child she was carrying had been fathered by a Black Panther member rather than her own husband. The distress caused by the story's publication sent Seberg into early traumatic labor. Her daughter died just days later, and Seberg insisted for the rest of her life on displaying the child's body in an open casket, specifically so photographers could see the baby was white. a devastating public rebuttal to a lie that had already done its damage. The Hollywood industry, never eager to associate itself with controversy of any kind, quietly closed its doors to her in the aftermath, and Seberg spent her final years increasingly isolated, fragile, and convinced, with good reason, that she was still being watched. In 1979, she was found dead in Paris, and while her death was officially ruled a suicide, her own ex-husband spent years afterward insisting it was the government, not despair alone, that had finally destroyed her. This is the darkest example on this list of how far the machine could reach. Erasing a performer's career, it turns out, was not always confined to a studio boardroom. Sometimes it came from the very top of the government itself. Number 1. Mady Christians. Mady Christians had survived one European catastrophe by the time she reached America. By 1950, she was an established and beloved figure of the American stage and screen, an Austrian-born actress who had fled fascism nearly 2 decades earlier and rebuilt a distinguished career from nothing, most memorably originating the title role in the beloved Broadway play, I Remember Mama. She was not a political radical. She was a longtime member of Actors' Equity's governing council and an outspoken opponent of racism who had spent years supporting causes for refugees and civil rights. Quiet, principled activism that had never before drawn any serious scrutiny. That changed the moment her name appeared in red channels, identified by an anonymous informant as a concealed communist sympathizer. Her career did not simply slow down, it stopped entirely, and almost overnight. A television role she had already accepted was pulled at the last moment, the producer telling her only that it had all been a mistake, offering to pay her salary anyway, as though money could soften the humiliation of being erased from a project she had already rehearsed for. The stress compounded relentlessly. Christians was hospitalized for severe hypertension, and in a letter to a friend during this period, she confessed that she could not yet bear to put into words the full weight of what had happened to her. On October 28, 1951, she collapsed at a friend's home in Connecticut and died that same day of a massive cerebral hemorrhage. She was 59 years old. Her friends and colleagues, defying the very blacklist that many believed had hastened her death, gathered 300 strong at her funeral in Manhattan, a final act of loyalty the industry itself had refused to offer her while she was still alive. Mady Christians never lived to see the blacklist lifted, never lived to see her name cleared, and never had the chance to rebuild what had been taken from her in a matter of months. Her death remains the starkest possible answer to the question this entire list has been asking. The machine did not simply end careers. In its most severe form, it could end a life, and it rarely, if ever, had to answer for it. These 16 women built the golden age of American entertainment with their own talent, discipline, and courage, and the same industry that profited from their gifts discarded most of them the moment they became inconvenient. Some found their way back, older, wiser, and never quite trusting the applause again. Many never did, spending the rest of their lives explaining to strangers who they used to be before a rumor or a signature rewrote the rest of their story. What connects all 16 of these cases, across 3 decades and every level of stardom, is the same cold arithmetic. The industry did not measure loyalty by talent, by box office, or even by the truth. It measured loyalty by silence, and the moment a woman chose her conscience over her convenience, the machine reminded her, without apology, exactly who was still in charge. All of them deserve to be remembered for far more than the year the machine decided to forget them.